Hi, this is Alex Baruch with Aim and Build Consulting and Development. Today we're talking about the business of alternative career pathways. We all know that it's been a huge issue for a broad array of organizations out there to find the ideal workforce. And what if the problem is that we didn't approach workforce development the right way? So with our three experts today, we'll rethink and explore the ways they rethink solutions to develop that workforce. Welcome everyone to the podcast, The Business Of. Today we're talking about the business of alternative career paths. And just really quick, this podcast, as you already know, is brought to you by the Library of Spokane and recorded in the Central Library Video Studio. And it will be available on City Cable 5, our local channel. It will also be available after the live streaming on the YouTube channel of the library and on ABCD's consulting website. So really quick, ABCD, we're a group of business consultants. I like to call us business doctors or business shrinks, and we're here to diagnose problems with organizations and help them resolve them. And the idea of this podcast started because we're a little tired of the idea of having workshops. And then at some point I realized that I'm very, very lucky. I'm surrounded by really smart people and really interesting people. And so we're like, why don't we have conversations instead of creating another workshop? And so that's how this whole thing started. Mm-hmm. So today we're talking about alternative career path. And if you don't mind, I will ask you to start with just a quick introduction of who you are and what you do. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Wade Larson, and I have been in the world of HR and employment, leadership development, workforce development for almost 30 years. And so really spanned all the industries, a lot of different organizations. So consulting, work for an organization, go consult for a while, go back into an organization, but really worked for hundreds of organizations and done. I haven't seen it all, but very familiar with a lot. So that's what I'm doing right now is workforce development.
Thank you, Wade. Mark?
Yes. Hi. My name is Mark Norton. I'm the principal for Norton Strategic Consulting, and we do consulting for aerospace and advanced manufacturing. I'm also the chair for the Inland Northwest Aerospace Consortium, which is a local industry group. We go from the Cascades all the way into western Montana, and it's all about companies that are doing supply chain work for the aerospace industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Doug?
And I'm Doug Edmonson. I'm the CT director at East Valley School District, and CT is Career and Technical Education.
Okay, thank you. Well, since you have the microphone right now, do you want to start about how did you start on this topic of alternative career paths?
Well, I think it's a topic we all should be talking about, and we all kind of do talk about in education, right? But it's also those alternative pathways in the education area are sometimes tucked away in a corner and aren't really brought out or talked about very often, because we talk a lot about colleges and how do we get kids down that college pathway. And it's just been a passion of mine of trying to create opportunities for all kids and making sure we talk a lot about equity, right? So how can we create these opportunities? Just because education worked for me doesn't mean it works for everyone. And these alternative pathways are ways for kids to find an early graduation pathway or career pathway that they didn't even know existed.
So you're directly in touch with the kids in school?
So as a CT director, I oversee those vocational, hands-on, project-based classes for the school district. So high school, middle school. And I also dabble in the elementary to plant some seeds as they come up through the system.
Awesome. Mark, how about you? How did it start? How did you start getting interested in this topic?
I think it actually started when we had, at our conference probably 6 years ago, we had the state economist for Idaho speak to us. And at that time, he was showing kind of the trajectory for industry going up like this. And then he said, here's the dark spot. And he showed how the workforce was going to be an issue. So we've known this is going to be a while. We've had this coming with this drop.
When was that?
This is 6 years ago. So this has
So
been
it's
on the radar
before COVID.
for a long time, and COVID just exacerbated it. So this was the opportunity, and that stuck in my mind immediately when I saw that, like, okay, we've got to get proactive here because we can't wait till it's a crisis, which we did anyway. But and so that really got me interested in this, and then seeing that the gap in manufacturing, where I've lived 45 years, is not just at the degreed areas. Like, it's not just engineers that we lack. We need skilled tradespeople. We need welders. We need machinists. And the whole industry is suffering from that, and that is part of the supply chain situation that we're seeing now, that everybody's seen since COVID. We simply don't have people to execute enough work. So that's really what got me engaged, and ever since then I've been fortunate enough to be affiliated with smart guys like this and figure out how can we do a better job filling that pipeline.
Awesome. Wait, how about you? How did you get connected to these issues?
Yes, when I started in HR, they would start with those job descriptions, right? Terrible job descriptions. Oh my gosh! Right? We always come down to this requirement, degree required, and that one always bugged me. In fact, that's what got me into HR, was writing these darn job descriptions, and I always wondered, well, what do you assume? When you say degree required and there's nothing else there? As you get into it, we have these bodies of knowledge, right? Competencies, and competencies are, knowledge, skills, capabilities, things that you want from a person. And for some reason, I thought, well, degree, that's going to automatically get you there, and it's not. And that's always bugged me since day one. And so when you dig into those competencies, you say, well, how does a person get that knowledge, skill, and ability? There are multiple ways to get there. And when you see this, person coming out with a degree, they oftentimes lack the skill. They'll have the knowledge but not the skill. But you see somebody that's been doing it for 20 years, didn't have the degree, they're that skill. So I've always recognized that. So it's always bugged me to say the degree is it. So as I get integrated in with the education paths with the providers of it, and you get to know the kids, you recognize there is more than one way to get there. So always been interested since day one, but the more you get to know people like Doug and Mark, the more you recognize that there are different ways to get involved in them. But I'll share the personal, how it hit home of the pathways talk, because I was the believer in the degree, but I'll share that later, but
Okay.
I've always been there.
Okay, yeah, with pleasure. And Mark, you said something that hit me, and we haven't talked about that before, but in the world of consulting, like, we're exposed to that question a lot. We don't have enough workers, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always associated to COVID. But what you said earlier is that we knew that was coming before. Can you? That's the first time I'm actually hearing that.
Yeah,
Can
I'm
you
sure.
talk a little bit
I'm
about
sure
this?
Wade could support that as well. But yeah, we've known this is coming for 7 or 8 years. We've seen this population fall off. We've also seen declining participation in manufacturing as an industry segment. And as somebody who's been around for a while, I think part of that is the emergence of the tech industry, right? That's also kind of a STEM-based career. That wasn't there 30, 40 years ago. It didn't even exist. And now it's competing for that same pool of technical talent that used to just go into manufacturing. So I think that's on top of just the population and everything else. We've got a whole nother competing industry, and if you can be a software engineer starting off at $200,000 at Facebook in Seattle, versus 60 grand a year being a machinist somewhere here, that's not a tough choice. So yeah, so there's a number of dynamics, but definitely people have seen it coming, but it just wasn't a crisis till COVID, and then now everybody's like, oh, we got a problem. But most of us know it's been there for a while.
How come there was no, people were just waiting for it to be a crisis to do something about it?
I think so, and I think I know, and I won't talk too much here, but I think one of the things I've noticed, I do work at the state level, right, with state policy and even a little bit of federal stuff, and we have a real bias towards the 4-year degrees in engineering. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's not just that bias. I mean, it's let's go, 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 but we've also been sharing for the last 20, 25 years. You've seen the decline of the shops in the high school. You've seen the decline of the specific trades or specific areas of types of jobs. And this is where our focus on the CTE, career technical education, comes back, say, we have a problem because we've been telling, for example, in manufacturing, we've been telling the kids, hey, these are dirty jobs. They're for, if you can't hack it in the 4 years, this is what it is. And that's not the case. It really isn't. These are very specific jobs, very skilled jobs that pay well. And you go for a little bit of training and you walk out and you get a $50,000 a year job. It's crazy. But really, to Mark's point, in the early 90s when I got into HR, the Department of Labor had this report that came out in 1990 that said, hey, here's a projection for the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. And they called it, 2020, here's this plummet. There's a plummet of supply to demand. Like, how could you call that 30 years out? To the dime. Yeah. To the dime it was there. And sure enough, as we progressed through the trends, 10 years ago, we started to scream and say, hey, here comes the cliff. 5 years ago, we're screaming, here comes the cliff. We didn't see the pandemic. We didn't see that from the pandemic to the point of exacerbation. We knew the silver tsunami was here before the pandemic, but because of that, we had 2 million more people retire than we were expected. We had 2.5 million moms leave because they can't find or afford daycare. We still have about 1.5 million of those moms out. We saw 2 million people leave for the gig economy, and at least 1 million of those are still out because they found it's easier to work for themselves. We closed the borders roughly about 6 years ago, made it tough to find them. We keep seeping the workforce while at the same time we stopped having babies in the 90s. Mm-hmm. So we have we have these two challenges of we have the population decline and we pushed them out.
Doug, yeah,
I was just going to add the educational pendulum as well, right? That swings back and forth in between going to a 4-year or directly into the workforce. It was so far to that one side about going to college that also added to that problem. And that's a piece that we're seeing right now that pendulum is starting to kind of swing backwards, not backwards, but back to the other side. And I think that's what is as an educational, district, we are trying to find ways to partner with our businesses because we've got the kids, so we have the workforce or the upcoming workforce. How can we work with industry to then figure out this relationship and connection so that we can create a conduit into that career pathway? We're talking a lot about in the East Valley School District about, how can we talk about careers as opposed to college, right? If we talk about careers, then those kids have that direct career pathway. Mm-hmm. If they say they want to go be a doctor, well, great. Let's talk about college because you're going to have to go to college to become a doctor. So it lends itself to that conversation as opposed to just saying, let's talk about college, like we have for the last 20 years and probably more than that as well. The other piece, too, that we haven't talked necessarily about is how when you have 51% of all kids that go to college drop out after their sophomore year. Right? As an educational establishment, what are we doing to help prepare those kids for the workforce and connect those kids to the workforce? And so that's a big piece that always sits in the back of my head when I'm thinking through these conversations. And I'm thinking about we have to plan as a district for that 51%, right? And how have we prepared them well enough to be successful and hit the ground running? Mm-hmm. And now with debt, a lot of debt, depending on what school they go to, right? So that's another factor as well.
Yeah. So do you think that's part of like how trends for college are born? Because people want, like, what creates this trend? Let me ask it this way: like, why 20 years ago we decided to push college more? And maybe you don't have the answer.
But I don't have the answer. I think it has to do with, if you look back, 100 years ago in the Industrial Revolution, and working hard to get that job to do well for your family. That was great. That worked really well. And then all of a sudden, the gig economy and the opportunities that were made, that if you actually did go to college, and the stats and the information behind it supported that if you did go to college, you would have a very high-paying job. That was true. Well, that has changed in the last 30 years, and that's where that pendulum shifts back and forth. So I definitely think that's a part of it. But I also think it's the generational piece too, where that generation wanted like all parents do, want those kids to live a better life than them. And for them, it was going to college. Like, you can make something of yourself. But like I said, that's changed, right? And how have we adapted to that change and our support of that? Yeah.
Yeah, and Wade, you mentioned earlier that that story hit home like a little more specifically, and
Yeah.
do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, as the college professor, right, I'm the one who's saying, "Hey, everyone's going to college, and let's go." And the oldest son did. He's the one who's the master degree engineer, so he set the tone. And then comes my daughter, and she went off. She did well. She has her associate's degree, and then she becomes mom, and so she did okay. Third daughter, she's brilliant at music. She said, "I want to go teach music." Gets to her first semester, she tanks because she can't process music theory. She hates it. She absolutely hates it, abhors it. But I'm pushed and said, "No, you got to stay in college. You got to stay there." She flunks out completely. Later on, when she becomes a massage therapist, she thrives. And she's going back to college now to do some other things, but that wasn't her time. But she thrives in massage therapy. The youngest, same thing. He's an artist. And he's like, I can't do college. I hate it. He goes, I'm like, dude, you gotta support a family. Think graphic design. Okay, I'll give it a try. He flunks out of the first version, comes here to the falls, painfully gets through the first year. I'm like, you gotta make the second year. I gotta get the piece of papers. I hate it. Stops doing it. He's right now he's a lead designer for No Lie and a couple of the other pubs in town. He works for one of the agencies here in town. Phenomenal, right? He has more side gigs. He has no time, and he's doing it with no degree. I mean, they're all thriving, and so I'm seeing it firsthand. It's amazing.
Yeah, interesting to have experienced that from your perspective.
When you see all the pathways again, more pathways. When you say, yeah, 4 years, I need the 4 years. I need engineers, right? I need that. 2 years, I need that. But we have apprenticeships. We have certificates. We have all these things. We have lots of options.
Well, we need that's it. We need all the options, right? And how can we make sure we create all those options and make kids and families in our community aware of all of those options?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the point that we talked just a little bit about before is like what are the the worst practices, and we'll talk about the solutions after. But what are some of the practices that were, I guess, part of the problem? And maybe you already covered some of that, but are there other examples that you want to dive into? Just
Well, Doug and I have been on a road trip for the last about a year, looking for best practices.
an actual road trip.
Actual road trips.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been looking for best practices. So I do a summer academy, the Manufacturing Institute, where we bring kids in for 3 weeks to simulate manufacturing. But start off with 20 kids. Last year we doubled it. This year we're going to have 4 or 5 simultaneous academies. So I asked the question about a year ago, can we do this year round? So we tried to figure that out. But in the meantime, through some other studies, we say, are there some best practices in high schools to prep students to be workforce ready by the time they graduate? And we started to find some. So we started in Wisconsin. I don't know, you want to talk about the Wisconsin trip?
So yeah, Cardinal Manufacturing, they have roughly 20 students in this Cardinal Manufacturing endeavor. It's a school district of 300 kids, K through 12, basically all in the same building. And this Cardinal Manufacturing is a 7th and 8th period of the school day. And during that time, they literally build whatever comes in the door or fix whatever comes in the door. This Cardinal Manufacturing makes for their school district and for this class $200,000 a year off of building things for their community. A tractor will come into the door that has a bent blade. They'll fix the blade. But more importantly, what it's taught the kids is how to present themselves properly to the community. They teach 21st learning skills. They teach the kids how to shake the adults' hands that walk in the room, introduce themselves, talk to them about what they're doing. Really job skills, right? And life skills that will help them in any endeavor that they go into. And that was also the beautiful thing that I loved about it, is it wasn't that 100% of these students are all going to go into manufacturing. There were, police officers, nurses, all those pieces that were still a part of this class, but the skills that they've learned are going to help them just be a good human being. And so, but yeah, Wade, I don't know if you want to talk about a few other pieces.
Yeah, so that was the size that none of us have an excuse to not do that, because if they can do it, and they've been doing it for 18 years.
Yeah.
So we went to another location in Fort Smith, Arkansas, just south of Bentonville. And this is, if you had all the resources, this is where a couple of educators got together, started talking to business, and they said, imagine a world. Gave them a hollowed out building, and this was one side trades, one side healthcare. And they blew it up. I mean, we have electrical automation being taught, we have machining, we have robotics, we have everything. These kids are leaving as graduates in high school with an associate's degree in machining. Mm-hmm. They are machinists. They can walk out into industry as a machinist, and that's all I'm asking for, best practice. Right. Went to Salem Kaiser last week, similar deal. They're even 20 miles away over at K-Tech. They're walking out the door with level 4 AWS welding certifications when they graduate. So I'm asking the question, why can't we do that? So that's
why?
We can't.
How much
We're
time we
working
have?
on it.
Well, so that's where Doug and I have this mission of saying, why not? And that's led us on this journey of where we're at today.
Okay. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're more on the manufacturer side, more like what is the role of like companies, like
Right.
is there a part that they can play in this? Because I mean, most of our listeners and watchers
Sure.
are from that world.
Yes. Yeah.
And they have the problem.
Right, right. And I was just going to piggyback actually off what Wade was saying. So when I took over as chair of NWAC, I was looking at it and talking with our board and other people, and I was just seeing in our community, we don't have very good connections between industry, higher ed, high school. There just wasn't this engagement. Like how, one of the things I'd hear from community colleges even would be, tell us what you need. Like, because there was no dialogue going on, right? There was none of this, like, what are the skill sets that you need? And so I think for businesses, whether it's through industry groups, in our area, us or Greater Spokane or what the AGC or whatever, we need as community stakeholders, we need to be more engaged with higher education, with high school, with apprenticeship groups, which I also work with as well, which that's really a non-traditional, kind of an alternative type career path. And we just need better dialogue, and we need more support. So real quickly, some of the things we're doing at NWAC, we recently got a grant to help these guys stand up. It's kind of a manufacturing thing. We are
Who's the money coming from?
The money's coming from the state. It was an evergreen grant for $200,000 that came from the state. We are doing tours of our factories. There's an engineering class at Ferris now, and there's students are coming through to get a vision of what does a manufacturing job look like. We're doing we work with Gonzaga to bring tours through plants in the summer for girls in high school, to get girls in engineering and STEM interested. So I think those are all things that we can do as industry to engage and really build this pipeline, because as Wade and Doug have said, we have to get kids interested in this. Like junior high is not even too soon, right?
Grade school.
Grade
Yeah,
school.
I was gonna say, I would even go down to grade school.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because what happens is they get to high school before we start talking about careers, and they've already got this vision, right? And their parents, which is just as important, right? So we need to get these kids interested and to let them experience and hands-on, experience, and that can give them a vision. I worked recently with kids who are incarcerated, right? And how do we get them out of this path of where they just don't have any hope? And in this particular population, most of their parents didn't even graduate from junior high. So they don't even know what success looks like. So how, as industry, can we engage and get those kids to see a pathway? I can have a better life, but what is that? They don't even know what it looks like. So sorry, I got my soapbox, but
No,
that's
great.
I think that's so important, and as manufacturers and as industry, we need to reach out, and I think in a lot of cases we need to initiate that engagement.
And I'm a little biased. I'm going to say connect with education, right? Because
Right.
again, we've got the students, and I know there's a lot of things that Wade has partnered and Wagstaff have partnered with the East Valley School District on, and others as well. But we're creating a lot of these trades nights, right? Which allow our entire community not only families but businesses all over the community that can have these nights if it's around the local trades, say it's construction trades. We've worked with ABC, Association of Builders and Contractors, to develop these nights that are for all ages. And it's a 100% hands-on event. So our vendors that come, and I'll use Wagstaff as an example. Wagstaff shows up with a trailer and they roll out the welders, and kids actually get to weld that night, right? And kind of get sometimes the first time they've ever welded in a safe environment to attract them to that career pathway. But there's all kinds of stuff that they can do. We've done a medical night, so healthcare pathways night, working with Providence and Jenna McDonald at AHEC and Chaz. And how can we expose kids to the multitude of career pathways in the medical field? Because everyone says they want to go be a doctor, but there's about 1,000 other jobs in between. And so without exposing them to those careers and those opportunities, they don't know they even exist. And so really kind of working on those pieces with folks.
Yeah. Like I was saying in the intro, so we're doing this instead of doing workshops, but we still want people to, the people who watch and listen to be able to connect in tangible ways and to be able to have some takeaways from this. So okay, we usually have people from nonprofit, the business world, local government, economic development. How can we connect with you? When did three of you work together? Is there an organization? What is the structure? Is there a structure?
Well, I'll tell you one of the best.
Can we just give your phone number?
Probably the best. We take a look at this from three operations. Right? The broader scale is we want to bring business and education together. About a third of the states have their act together about aligning resources and being on the same page. In our state, bless our hearts, it looks more like a star cluster of who's trying to solve this problem. That's going to be part of it. Locally, we want to create a model that makes that work. That's our bigger scale. But here we have two specific projects that we're trying to do at East Valley and here locally. And one is this Manufacturers Institute, and that's what we do every summer. And so where we've expanded it to as many as 5 locations, we rely on donations, and we route it through the Spokane Workforce Council to maintain nonprofit status. So we have a website at manufacturersinstitute.net. And that's where.
Can you repeat that?
Manufacturersinstitute.net.
Okay, we'll try to make it.
Yeah,
make it a little fancy thing.
That'd be perfect. That has information for donors, for sponsors, to help us out with that, because the attendees, the participants, get a $1,500 stipend, along with some kind of high school credit to go along with their efforts for completers. With that, it also ties into our efforts with where we're going with East Valley School District to come up with what does that look like for the education, so we can revamp it, create the interest, create the skilled technicians when they graduate, for those who want to go that route or prepare to go to their next step of education. So it's really a 3-pronged approach that we're trying to create.
Okay. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
Sure, I encourage any industries. NWAC's traditionally been aerospace focused. We're expanding our scope to all what we would call advanced manufacturing, or industries that need a lot of technical expertise in what they do. So feel free, for right now, NWAC, inwac.org, so inwac.org, and just reach out to us and we'll get you, if we're not the right people, we'll get them connected to the right people.
Okay.
And I would say what you said. My phone number works just fine. Phone number, email, whatever it takes. I mean, honestly, it's about connecting people, and that's what we realize is that we have to be connectors in order for something like this to happen and gain some more traction.
Okay. Now, some of the people that watch too are just parents or just people in the community.
Sure.
I feel, but I don't necessarily have the answers because I haven't studied this topic like you guys have. People can get involved in different ways, and what would you recommend? What are easy solutions for parents or members of the community to help move this agenda forward?
I mean, if it's a parent that's interested, I would say again, reach out to your local school district and see what they're doing within their local school district and start asking those questions. Because sometimes just asking the question of, hey, how are we connecting our students with our community, as a simple general question at a board meeting or to the assistant superintendent of education, what does that look like? That can help spark some of those questions. But if they want to get involved, again, with these pieces that we have going on, if they want to come in and volunteer their time, or again, have a company that wants to support it, reach out to us and let us know how we can get you connected. That I think is the easiest way.
If it's a company, we've created somewhat of an informal consortium among manufacturers, and that's really what makes the institute, the Manufacturing Institute, work. I've reached out to some key employers, Kaiser, McKay Manufacturing, Alltech, several others that are just based and have helped support this through the years, and many others who are there helping us out, Hot Start and others. That's the support. So if, through those sponsorships and help, that can continue.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. One topic that we talk about pretty often here is equity, diversity. How is it connected to your specific topic and what you've been diving into? And I mean, we're talking about ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, too. Maybe age too. Like sometimes it's
Sure.
also like
Oh, yeah.
it's part of it's part of the demographics that are excluded. How does it relate to the work you're doing? What is the
First?
impact on
Go ahead.
diversity?
I'm going to try and make this concise.
We're
long-
great on time, so you
All right.
really don't have to.
My long-term strategy is to get students to graduate with their degrees, their certificates, whatever it works to get them workforce prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And so other states do not have a problem with having an 18-year-old graduate with their high school diploma and their associate's degree. We have no excuse. So with that, what that does is by offering it in the high school, then students can get their associate's degrees or their partial degrees without fees, without costs, without the overhead expenses. I know we have other programs like Running Start, and that's great, but Running Start has some limitations.
Mm-hmm.
They have to go to the campus. It will cover the fees, but they'll cover the tuition, but not the fees.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I have a student who's struggling in Deer Park, they're not going to be able to make it to campus. They're not going to be able to do this. Running Start's a great program. But until I can get the student, the program in Deer Park or at Riverside High School, I can't make it happen for everyone from an equity and diversity perspective. I can't make that happen for everybody. If I can offer that program and have college credit where they can actually leave with a IRC, an industry recognized certificate, if I can give them the shot to leave with an associate's degree in high school, so that they can leave at 18 years old and go to work in a job that will make $45,000, $50,000 to start with benefits, but no debt. That's a game changer, and that's available to anyone, regardless of their protected class status, their socioeconomic status. That's a game changer.
Yeah, it's really impactful. One of the topic we talk about pretty often with diversity, equity, and inclusion is how to start creating generational wealth.
Right.
And it seems like a good starting point.
Yeah.
A real game changer.
I can offer it to anyone. We can offer tools. We can offer resources. Everyone has access in that kind of a setting. When we get past the question, who gets the credit? Which educational institute gets the credit? Which educational institute gets the paycheck from the state? You get past that and we start focusing on the student to say, how can I facilitate that? And we start bringing in the partnership of saying, well, let's get business involved in the equation instead of just trying to solve it over here. We've got to take a bigger pie perspective, right? So instead, we're trying to say, here's the pie, how do we divvy up the one pie? I'm thinking in terms of make the pie bigger. You've got to get a bigger pie. You may have the same slice, but the bigger pie, everyone gets more.
I love what Wade just said, right? It's about what's best for the student.
Right.
We got to keep that at the center instead of worrying about all the other pieces, because a lot of politics can get involved in this very quickly, and that's the hard part is how can we keep that out of the equation and focus on what's important, which is those students, and how can we best impact them. Wade talked about IRCs. I mean, that's a big piece. I know in the Spokane area, as a CTE Directors Consortium, we're working hard at making sure we have articulation agreements in our CTE classes, having our...
Can you? I don't
Yeah,
know what
that-
that is.
So articulation agreements would be working with your colleges,
Okay.
local community colleges, in order to get college credit for kids in that class. So it's an articulation agreement where essentially the foundational principles of whatever is being taught is also covered at a college level, right? So then, therefore, our teachers can get credit for those kids, and it doesn't cost the kids a dime to get that college credit. But we're also working through IRCs, industry recognized credentials, so that when that kid who takes that class goes through that semester or year class, can walk out with a certification. Could be a welding certification, could be whatever it may be. But again, those are options for kids to then essentially have a portfolio that they're leaving high school with. And as a CT director group, we've worked really hard on trying to create those opportunities for kids in the whole area.
I was just going to add as well, I think one thing we haven't touched on is it's not so much in the academic setting, but it's also it's that 18 to 30-year-old population of people that maybe got out of high school and they've just kind of drifted around. They're in dead-end jobs, right? They're just not thriving. And how do we get them upskilled? And how do we get them turned into where they can really find careers that make a living, that transitional piece. And I know I'll put a plug in here. Greater Spokane has recently hired an individual who is working that whole thing. Like, how do we take people that were
They
incarcerated?
did or they haven't?
They have.
They
Yes,
have.
Matt Himley is his name. Great guy. And they are working to figure out how do we get those people that have just been kind of drifting and not having success and really get them retrained and get them into the workforce to where they can find a better life. And that's just a pool of talent that we have out there that's just kind of untapped right now. And how do we do that? So I just throw that in as another, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, which we would all agree, right?
But that's also the group, and then the next group are the ones who are looking for part-time work. They don't want to work 40 hours. They're looking for the part-time work, and we as employers have to rework work. We have to recognize that 2 part-timers equals a full-timer. These folks have kids. They need to drop them off at 8:30 and pick them up at 3, and we have to do that. As employers, we have to stop saying, look, my work happens in 40-hour blocks. We have to start becoming flexible and start recognizing that work is modular. Our schedules need to be modular. We have to make it work, and that also takes into account competencies. I know our job looks like this, and it has for the last 30 years, but when we start chunking it out into, well, what do we need them to know, be, and do? And we start breaking it out into modules and competencies and say, all right, here is a block. Can I find someone to do this for this amount of time? Then we can tap into a more diverse group, a greater group, bring them in, and let's be honest, we're going to have to learn how to develop our own talent internally and rely upon multiple resources. I'm 100% supportive of all the current resources. So we're 100% supportive of the colleges, all the universities, the programs. I'm saying go, go, go. We still want those. We still need those. I'm 100% supportive of all the programs. This is a bigger pie concept. I think that as we generate more interest all over the place, we're going to actually grow the current programs as well with greater interest.
Great. I will have some follow-up questions on that, because I think from the business perspective, there's a lot of rethinking that needs to happen. But I think we have a couple questions, and I want to make sure we're covering them. Mark, do you have something?
Yeah, a couple here that showed up. So one, I'll try to paraphrase this, but one of the many benefits of college degree is you get the degree. You get the piece of paper that you can take down the street or around the world that says, I'm competent, I can do this thing. And we're in this era of the golden age of self-teaching with YouTube and LinkedIn Learning. And how do we take that possibility and make it portable? And I think that maybe you've already touched on some of this, but that's one thing that I've run into in the past.
Do you want to try that first, or you want me to go from the industry side?
You can go from the industry side. Yeah.
This is exactly what we're talking about, IRCs, industry recognized certifications. I mean, LinkedIn Learning, everybody has a certificate qualification, but it's that question of how do we recognize what a person can know, be, and do. And so you're right, everybody gets a certificate that they print off at the end of learning. As employers, we have to ask that question, well, what does good look like? What do we want them to know, be, and do, and how do we validate it? Is a degree really there? We have plenty of people with degrees that can't know, be, and do. They can't critically think, they can't problem solve, they can't do the things that we want them to do. That cannot be the standard of doing it. we as employers have to ask the question, how do we verify that they can know, be, and do it? The piece of paper is just a piece of paper. The portability, and I get that all the time from the academic side, that if they don't have the degree, then it's not portable. And I would argue, no, it's not. Testing validation internally is a big deal, but that's also the point of IRCs, industry recognized certifications. If I'm a welder and I have an AWS certification, that's the industry standard, that says I went, I learned, I took a test, and I tested that I can do these at certain levels. If they come into me as an employer, they can show that to me, that gets them past the front door, not a degree. But as the employer, I better darn well have them light it up and put the welder in their hand to make sure that they can run a bead to my specifications. So there's two parts to it. One, yes, portability, the certificates are fine, but number two, as the employer, I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm validating.
I was, and to piggyback on that too, I think we're seeing an increasing trend, and you can see it coming up more and more on LinkedIn, to have competency be the criteria, not a degree. And like an example would be a software programmer, right? I think just about any programmer, I know this world a little bit, will tell you a degree means nothing. That means you learned the programming language. It doesn't mean that you know how to program. And so most companies that are hiring programmers, you have to do a test. You have to show competency. And so I think there's more of that coming up in other areas, right? And I've certainly in engineering, I've seen it. I've seen, people with PhDs in engineering that were not very good, and I've seen floor people, the guy who's actually doing and putting assembly together, come up with solutions that an engineering team struggled with. So I think we will see more of a shift, right, Wade, to more of this competency-based evaluation, and that may be, and part of that being driven by the workforce shortage, but I think we're going to see more of that happening in the future.
Well, I think it's really interesting too, just to think about that certificate, and I appreciate you both speaking to give me some more time to think through it. But what's really interesting, right, is that we have had this sense that a degree was for everyone, and everyone should get one. Like, that's one piece that I want to bring up is I firmly, even though education worked for me, I firmly don't believe it works for everyone. And so we need to have those engineers that do need to go get that degree, right? But we also need those folks that maybe college wasn't the route for them, and having that welding certification is going to mean a lot more than a college degree for them personally. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all for everyone. I think it's an individualized what works for you and in your individual pathway to go be successful for the rest of your life. And what's interesting, right, is that welding certificate may work for me for 20 years, and then I may want to shift gears and go do something else. And we're seeing a lot of that in education now, where, a lot of job changes in the future for these future generations, where it'll happen, maybe 14 different major job shifts in their lifetime, where for me it was 7, right? And so it's definitely changing. So.
And this gets to a concept that Deloitte has shared over the last year. The students who are graduating high school today, they're going to be around in the year 2100. Whew, think about that one. A good number of them are going to live to be 100.
I just got shocked by what you said. I realized.
You should be. I had to pause. I had to pause. Now, because they're living that long, they're not going to be retiring at age 65 or 67. The thought that I'm going to work just this long and I can afford to live that long, it's not going to happen. And so we have to think about the 60 to 70 year career. Whew, think about that one. And even in the physical trades, right? Our bodies are still going to wear out, and so we have to guide these students to think ahead about how many careers are you going to have, and it's not about what are you going to do in terms of a job. We need to train them in terms of what do you want to do, what do you like to do, what interests you, knowing that I'm going to have to give you competencies to learn how to learn how to shift and pivot, because let's be honest, you're going to have 2, 3. I mean, I don't know how many careers I count on mine that I've had, simultaneously in most cases. But in this case, when you hit 65, that's just another pivot, because you got another career that you're going to have for another, 15, 20 years.
Don't say that in France.
You guys had a revolt.
Macaron will
that's
get all
about
over
it.
you.
You almost had a revolt over there. But that's what we're talking about realistically for this current generation. So rethinking
It's,
work? Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. Was there another question, Mark?
If I may, this was my own question.
Yes, please.
Sure.
So, in the work that you do, how much is focused on job and career versus, something that's near and dear to my heart in the work that I do here at the library is entrepreneurship. And you've got a skill. You can weld. You can do X. You can do Y. You can do Z. How much of an emphasis is placed on looking for the job versus, hey, have you ever thought about hanging out a shingle, going it your own?
So I'll start. I think like what you just said, that last piece is very important. Like, have you ever thought about this? And in the education sector, again, it's highly important that we have a lot of conversations with our counselors because they're our mouthpiece to our students, right? And I do think, personally, that mind shift of talking about a career pathway as opposed to college helps with that because then they can ask that question, right? You say you want to go be a welder. Well, does that mean that you want to work for a large company? Or do you want to have your own business? Or are you talking about welding because you really like cars and automotive? And so what do you want? So it lends itself to have a deeper conversation to really find out what is your true pathway. And it's okay if it zigs and zags, right? We all have. And so that's okay. But again, how can we continue them down that road instead of just stopping going, I don't know what to do next. And so, but I do think it has to do with the way in education we teach and deliver the material and allow them to have that entrepreneurial mind in anything that we teach. If you're in an English class, that's great. Well, let's talk about creative writing and what that actually means. You want to go write a novel. Well, that's great. What does that mean? It may help you to go maybe into a junior college and get some business classes if you want to start your own business and create your own line of books or whatever it may be. And so, but I guess to me that's it. It's the conversation that needs to happen.
And thank you for broadening it to things like creative writing. Like I think
Right.
people have the assumption that they're only going to become a welder or
Right.
a machine operator, which is great, but it's a much broader conversation.
Well, I think what I realized, right, doing this work, is that if I, if I want to go work at Wagstaff as an engineer, that's great, right? They have engineers, but they also have accountants, they also have HR, right? They also have manufacturing
Marketing
workers.
with
They
creative
also have
writers.
marketing,
Right.
right? So I mean, there is a plethora of jobs in a singular organization that people don't really think of, right? And I'll go back to Tyler Lafferty's book, Be More Like You, and it's like, okay, I want to go be a professional athlete. Well, that's a very, very small percentage that actually becomes that professional athlete. But if I still want to be in that arena of professional sports, I can go be a marketer. I can go be an accountant if I really like that piece. And so just letting kids know and families know that there are opportunity and options for them in a pathway that they love. They just have to do some deeper research to understand.
Do you guys have a take on Mark's question as well?
I do, from two perspectives. One, as of March of this year, the Department of Labor stat is that 36% of tax filers registered as entrepreneurs, self-employed. 36% of the market. Wow. But we don't teach entrepreneurship as a major line of employment. That's interesting. That's part one. Part two, before the pandemic, at least 45% of all currently employed people had a gig. Like Uber, whatever, Fiverr, whatever it is, 45%. After the pandemic, over 60% of currently employed, not just the full-time employed, because that's the 36%, but over 60% of currently employed people have a gig. So that's all about entrepreneurship. So if we've got 60% of everybody who's employed plus the 36% who's there, we've got what, 90%? Well, 66% plus people they're entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But we're still not teaching entrepreneurship as a mainstream topic. So what does that say? Just
got some-
asking.
we got
But
some work to do.
but in America, what have we done? I mean, we've always made stuff. We've always done stuff. We made stuff up. We've always been primo on entrepreneurship. That's what we've always done best. The Japanese have always been done well at what they do, right? In terms of what they do. The Germans have always been precision oriented. They've done stellar at what they do. America, yeah, we've made stuff. We've done okay with manufacturing. We've done okay. We've made stuff, but we have excelled at entrepreneurship. We have excelled at making stuff up and doing it, and yet we have declined in that area of really accelerating that, and we don't teach it.
So I'll take 30 seconds because in general, I don't talk about ABCD much in this podcast, but one of the problems that we've noticed, and it started with actually one of our clients offering a solution. We work for a nonprofit here locally that's called Terrain, and that offers entrepreneurship classes for artists. But that could really be extended to physical therapists. Right now we're creating, I'm working on a program for entrepreneurship for people with certain areas of expertise, but they might not know how to create a consulting business or a grant writer business or things like that. And I'm always curious about how to connect these dots. And we think that because someone knows how to be a physical therapist, they know how to run a physical therapy business. But in fact, very often they don't, or a dentist, or So do you have any take on that? Is it connecting? How do we connect these dots between entrepreneurship and?
Well, I think part of it we've already talked about is we need to incorporate some of this in the high school curriculum, and even around money management. I connect those things together because,
Of course.
the latest statistic is right now 60% of the population can't cover a $400 cash emergency. We're not good at managing our money.
400.
Yeah.
Not 4,000. 400.
Yeah,
It's
$400, not 4,000. So we have a lot of people who are really struggling financially, and you can say there's other things to do with that, with wage and the real wages versus inflation and all that. But still, we don't, and I know Doug's gonna resonate with this, but we don't teach kids life skills in high school, right? You're going to be at 18, you graduate, and in some families that means you're on your own. You're good to go. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't understand about mortgages. They don't, all this, which is all part of this, right? And if you're good thinking about maybe being an entrepreneur, we just don't teach any of these business skills, and some of these kids are transitioning right out in the work world, and they're not armed with any skills, and to me that's something we have to look at, I think.
And I would say the good thing is that there's new legislation, right, that we have to teach financial literacy in the K-12 system, so that's great. There's some good things coming down the road, and a lot of the districts in the area and across the state have been doing that for many years. But I think the piece that you said that's important is, or at least the part that I took from it, is that we're not teaching it in an application-based way. Right? We may be talking about financial literacy, and we're talking about, I know kids don't have checkbooks anymore, but balancing their monthly statement, but we don't have it in the sense of, hey, you just bought a house. Now let's talk about your wage and how much your monthly mortgage is, and let's talk about that principal and interest, and let's talk about compound interest, and start kind of going down the road, because now you have to really balance your checkbook. You're in the real world, you just bought a house. And what does that mean for the next 30 years of your mortgage or whatever? Instead of just running numbers, right? I think that's the difference. Is it gets taught, but how are we teaching it, and how can we teach it in a way where kids can really resonate with them, and then be able to use that very quickly in the near future.
Okay, great. Mark, did you answer your question? Two quick questions because we're getting closer to the end. One, there are several nonprofits in our area, in our region, that focus on supporting people coming from traditionally discriminated or excluded communities. Is there a path to connect with the work you do do you have any recommendations for them to connect the workforce that they're connected with the effort that you're leading? And sometimes there can be a language barrier. What we've noticed as a big part of the problem too is that sometimes not even the language is thinking that we're talking about spaces where people don't belong. It's a cultural barrier. Do you have any recommendation for that?
They're all looking to the distance. I'm going to put a plug in for Launch Northwest. This is the group that's supported by Innovia, the Innovia Foundation, and so a few months ago they put together kind of a task force, a group together to say, how can we support the everything, right? The whole child, if you will, especially through the high school, but also create the success, and they go beyond high school into the college side too. But it's really saying, look, there's a lot more. There's a lot of moving parts that go into it. It's not just getting them out of high school. There are a lot of moving parts. A lot of these kids, especially from these groups, they don't have, they're dealing with a lot. You have some emotional problems. You have socioeconomic problems. You have, to your point, they have a lot going on. What are the resources that we can come together as a community to help them with? So they are doing some great work, banding these resources together through the community to say, what can we do? So I know that they're moving. I don't have a specific answer for you because they're still, we're still about in the first 6 months of that. Okay. But that's a place I'd recommend looking at.
So it's Innovia, and what's the name of the
So
project?
Launch Northwest.
Launch Northwest.
Yeah, Launch Northwest. I don't have a website. I should. Since I'm on the board, or since I'm on the committee, but I don't. Launch Northwest is the group, but fun. Yeah, it's through Innovia.
Okay, awesome. Do you guys have anything to add to that too? And otherwise, I'll have one last question for you. Go ahead.
I think one of the things we've been talking about lately is taking English as a second language, and I think you mentioned that, right? And one of the big opportunities we have in this series, we have a very large Ukrainian population. And that particular population has got some great, it's just kind of their culture, but they've got great manual skills, right? Whether it's construction or manufacturing. But it's the language barrier and to some extent a cultural barrier. And how do we work that? Is that putting an interpreter in the shop floor, or somebody that maybe isn't an interpreter per se, but can speak both languages and is Ukrainian and knows that culture, can kind of help those other people that are new make it, because some of these people have incredible skills. I know Doug knows it from the contracting piece, and it's just this, again, it's another pool out there of workforce that is just sad we're not utilizing it, and we just need to figure out, unfortunately I don't think we have an answer yet, but it's definitely something that I know some of us are looking at, is how do we bring these people in, and it's increasing all the time. So I think that's something we can work on.
And I would say from the educational standpoint, it is about, our school's community is our community. And so, our doors are always open to them. But as far as connecting, I know one piece that our district has been trying to do, and other districts as well, is how can we, a lot of those communities are tied really, really tightly to their local church. And so how can we get involved with that church and let them know that we are here to support them and help build connections? Because I'll be honest with you, just like the three of us, it's all about relationships, and how can we build relationships with them that aren't just surface level, that actually show that we do care. You are a part of our community, and how can we help support you and get you connected as well? And so that's a big piece that we've been kind of focusing on as well.
That's great.
Great. One last question that, in fact, I'm not sure it's a great idea to ask this as a last question, because I feel it could be a topic of a whole afternoon of conversation, but I wanted to go back to the point that you touched on earlier. So for us as consultants, we're in a lot of boardrooms or executive committee rooms, and people complaining that they can't hire, that they can't find a workforce. And we do bring this point that, well, there is maybe 20-ish% of companies that can hire and retain. So maybe the issue, and it's going to sound a little harsh, is not that
it should be harsh. I'm just
To
saying.
be honest, yeah.
That it's maybe not that people don't want to work, it's maybe they don't want to work for you.
Yes.
Right? So, and you touched on that point, for instance, and so that's more the work that we do. We help people rethink strategy, rethink how they organize work, rethink why shouldn't we rethink after like basically 3 years of pandemic where people have realigned the way they think, the way they live, what their priorities are. So what is your take on that? And I'm sorry, we just have a couple minutes, but what is your take on that?
Go.
All right. We don't talk about the Great Resignation that much anymore because it's so passé. We are still at 4 million people resigning every month. We had 2 months maybe in the past 3 years that it has not been 4 million people. It's still happening. Number one reason is culture, and that's tied to the manager. How they're treated, how they feel. Do they feel like this is home or not? That's the number one. Yes, money's in there, but that whole money shifting game, that happened in year one. We're past that. Culture matters the most. End of story. That's it. If you can't fix your culture, you will never fix the retention. You'll never fix it. You can promise them the world, but they're going to come in through the front door and they're going to talk to your employees. And if they hate it there, they're going to turn around and go find another job or go get their old job back. And that's that. Number two, they want a future. And so they will talk to you about the next job. They're interviewing not for this job, they're interviewing for the next job. And if you don't have an answer for them about what's next, they're not going to be really thrilled about coming to work for you. So that gets into the development question that we were talking about. You better have an answer for them when they come to interview.
And I don't know if there's a book that really ties the two questions, and I don't know if you guys have read it. It's by Keegan and Leahy, An Everyone Culture, and he talks about DDOs, deliberately developmental organizations, where basically culture becomes strategy, and one of the points is like becoming an incubator of talents, where like your role as a manager is not to make sure that that person who can operate that machine will stay at that job forever, is to make sure that they have a path to grow. So that's basically what you're...
It is. We need to hire people for their capabilities, not for that job, because that job may not even exist in 1 to 2 to 5 years.
Right.
The technology is changing so fast, and if we as an organization are not changing that fast, we're going to be out of business. That's that. Every single job we should be asking: when do we eliminate it? Do we automate it? Do we delegate it? And do we upskill for this thing? And with that, we have to upskill our employees. And if we're not, we are going to be out of business. It's moving that fast, faster than it ever has. That's the mindset. So we need to hire our employees by capabilities, not by their current skill set.
Guys, do you want to add something before we close?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think part of that solution now is technology, because it becomes very easy when you're in the tides of war, or whatever you want to call it, right? The chaos of war, day to day, to lose track of that, right? And all of a sudden you realize I haven't talked to my guy that reports to me for 3 weeks. So how do we build systems? And there are systems coming out now that do that, and they say, you and Joe haven't talked for a month, right? And that's part of the culture piece. And here's the things, this is the development goals that Joe had, his personal and professional goals that he wanted. How do you quantify that? And how do you make sure, how do you utilize technology to help you make sure that you are staying in contact and you are reviewing those goals on a regular basis, so that you can develop your people and your talent, to Wade's point. Because I agree, everything I've read says, millennials, Z's, X's, whatever, they want to see a path. They want to know, what is the future? Where am I going to be? And how am I going to get there? Not just an insurance, we're going to give you a better gig, in 10 years. But what does that look like? How do I progress through that? And if you don't have that, you're going to struggle to retain talent.
The job of leadership has changed.
Yeah, and we're just in a whole different paradigm, right? So anyway,
I would agree with a lot that was already said. I don't know what else I could add aside from, it is about the culture, like Wade said, and it's about connections. And how can, as a leader, I have to connect with my employees in a certain way that makes them feel like they belong, but also there's accountability. And to me, those are two separate things, but they work hand in hand, because you have to be able to hold people accountable. Like if they say, what is that next job? And you say, well, let's talk about that. If you want to get here, then you got to have these skills. So how can you start to work on those skills to be successful? And sometimes those are difficult conversations, but as a leader, we have to have those. Yeah. And even though they may not be the popular one, If it's to better your employee for down the road and it means you have to have a tough conversation, it's still better. And so it's still better to have those conversations. So
Great point.
Awesome. I feel like this question is like such a gigantic topic. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. I wish we had like much more time, but yeah, it was great to have you here. Mark and Ryan, thank you. Mark and Ryan from the library. Eric from City Cable 5. Next month, we will be talking about the business of disruption, and I think the date is June 22nd. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.